In honor of the late Senator Bob Dole, flags at half-staff at the nation's capital today. From the Kansas City Star's obit of the late senator, Dole entered public service in 1950 at age 27, and in 18 years rose from the Kansas House of Representatives, Russell County Attorney, and the U.S. House to the Senate. In 1976, he joined the GOP ticket as a vice presidential candidate, then ran twice unsuccessfully for the Republican presidential nomination before becoming his party's presidential nominee in 1996 at age 73. He will lie in state today at the nation's capital, and lawmakers will be paying their respects and giving tributes. One of them is Senator Chuck Grassley, Republican of Iowa, and he's joining us now from the Capitol. Senator Grassley, tell us about your friendship with Senator Dole. When did you first meet?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me here and to talk about Bob Dole and my mentor when I first went to the United States Senate. And I assume that my first meeting with him, I don't remember exactly, but I was a member of the U.S. House when he was in his second term in the United States Senate. But I really got acquainted with him because I was campaigning for the United States Senate in 79 and 80, and that was his first time to try to be president of the United States in the Iowa caucuses. And we just would have interacted many, many times in the various counties that he was in, and he just practically lived in Iowa for the winter of 79 into early 80. But the first thing about him is he was a mentor for me in the United States Senate because he'd been there 12 years when I was serving my first year. And in my first year in the Senate, I was able to get on the powerful Finance Committee, least in seniority, but he then became chairman. The first time Republicans had a chairman for 24 years in the United States Senate. So working closely with him there, and then his coming from an agricultural state and me, we worked together on agricultural issues. And he was just a mentor to me and a friend. And let me say one other thing before you ask a question. I had the good pleasure of visiting his apartment in Washington, D.C. 1 week after his 98th birthday. And if you had your eyes closed and just listened to him talk about the issues and his strong voice, you would know that he wasn't sick at all. That's how I remember him.
Well, tell us a little bit more about that visit. What were the issues that you discussed?
Well, I think we discussed just very generally the going on in the Congress of the United States and probably the division within the Congress now between conservatives and liberals and the lack of cooperation, because that meant a lot to Bob Dole. He was a person that could work across across state partisan lines. He's the sort of a person that knew that you had to have Republicans and Democrats if you were going to get anything done. He knew that both people that were against the bill and people that were for the bill, some way, both of them had to have some victories. And that's what made him a successful leader of the United States Senate for I think the 11 or 12 years that he was a Republican leader, and part of that he was a majority leader.
Yeah. What advice did he give you as your mentor?
I think the advice was that if you're going to get anything done in the United States Senate, you got to do it in a bipartisan way. On agricultural issues, I think the advice was that there's a lot of different interests between Midwestern agriculture, where he and I come from, and Southern agriculture and California agriculture, and some ways on agricultural issues. All of those interests in the United States have to be settled. You can't just expect because you're from Iowa that you're going to get everything that corn and soybean people want and forget about cotton and peanuts, etc. And I think he taught me on international issues that the United States had to have a strong military, because you know about his military background, being a war hero, and that the United States needed to be a leader.
So, as you mentioned, he ran for president 3 times. He spent a lot of time in Iowa, became known as Iowa's 3rd senator. You spent a lot of time with him in the state yourself. Do you have a fun story or any story that you can share with us of your memory of Bob Dole being in Iowa?
Yeah, in the 1996 caucuses in Iowa, I made a point of traveling with him on a regular basis, sometimes 4 or 5 meetings a day. I had the opportunity to introduce him, and I thought making this person battle ready in politics as well as military. I always talked about going up Hill 13. He always corrected me. It was really Hill 913 in Italy, where he was wounded and then hospitalized for 3 years, and then never got the use of his right arm again because his shoulder was shattered by shrapnel. And he was witty about correcting me those things. And then another thing that may sound a little weird, but it was typically Bob Dole. At the end of the day, after 4 or 5 meetings campaigning in Iowa for the Republican nomination, whether we're going to a hotel or getting on an airplane to go to the next stop, in a car, or going to a restaurant, he would say at the end of the day, probably because he was tired, but there was some fun in it, he'd say, "Free at last, free at last." And so I ended my tribute to him Monday on saying that story that I just told you, and I said, "Bob, free at last."
He was known when he was the Republican leader as the hatchet man. Can you tell us why?
Would you state that again?
He was known as the hatchet man. That was the nickname given to him for his leadership.
Oh, yes.
And tell us why, in your opinion.
Well, I think very seldom, as leader of the Senate or chairman of the Finance Committee, would I call him a hatchet man. I think he got that reputation when he was vice president nominee in 1976, and I had a chance, I was in the House of Representatives then, I had a chance to introduce him in Waterloo, Iowa, campaigning for the Ford ticket. And Ford was a nice guy and wanted to be seen as a presidential candidate as a nice guy, but there were a lot of things that Republican had to say bad about the Democrat candidate, and that was Bob Dole's job, and he hit at it real hard, and that's how he got that job, that name. And then in the end, you know, a long time later maybe, he apologized for that role that he had, that it wasn't typically Bob Dole, because Bob Dole could be strong, but he was also witty. But as a vice presidential candidate, he didn't tend to be very witty, just attack, attack, attack. I don't think he was comfortable in that role.
Senator Grassley, what do you think about him getting the honor today of lying in state in the nation's capital?
I think for several reasons, but most importantly, being wounded, a war hero, defending our country, defending our freedom and liberties, an outstanding public servant, a tribute, as he was somewhat disabled, a tribute to what he did to help disabled people through the Disability Acts of 1991 or whenever it was passed. I think that he came up from a life of poverty, and he was helping people with food stamps and with Medicaid, people that were downtrodden. He knew their life, and he respected that and found public policies that would lead to better life for people that are lower income or in poverty. He never forgot his roots. And if I was honoring him, putting him in state, like he's going to lie in state today, those are some of the things that I would think would be rationale for doing it. But maybe the most important thing in this day of so much partisanship is that he always tried to work across the party lines, and he was successful in doing it, and that's what we need today.
Senator Chuck Grassley, thank you, sir, for sharing your thoughts with us this morning. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you very much.